He dragged a nurse through smoke and still stared down the dark, because somewhere inside that hospital, the forgotten were waiting to be found. The halls of St. Arlo's Medical Center were never truly silent, not even in the dead hours of early morning. There was always the soft hiss of oxygen tanks, the beeping of monitors, the low murmur of tired nurses behind half-closed doors. But at 3:12 a.m., something different cut through the stillness. A howl, long, sharp, full of something no one wanted to name. The sound came from the basement, from a canine named Echo, his voice bouncing off the sterile tile and cinder-block walls like a warning siren from a place the world forgot. He was supposed to be asleep by then, curled up in the small security office beside his handler's desk. Instead, he was planted in front of an old concrete wall, one paw lifted like he was pointing to a ghost, his chest rising and falling with every drawn-out howl. Lucy Brennan was halfway through her second cup of lukewarm coffee when the radio on her hip crackled. Brennan," came a shaky voice from maintenance. "Your dog's going crazy down here. You might want to see this." She didn't hesitate. She'd known Echo too long, knew the rhythms of his breath, the meanings behind the twitch of his ears or the tilt of his head. He wasn't prone to dramatics. He didn't bark at shadows. When she reached the basement, her boots echoing down the stairwell, she found him still there, motionless now, except for the soft whine in his throat and the way his tail laid flat against the floor. The maintenance worker pointed, trying to laugh it off. "Been howling like that for 10 minutes. I think he's having a flashback or something. Dogs from the force get weird, right?" Lucy didn't answer. She was already crouching beside Echo, her fingers brushing the fur at his neck, calming, checking. His body was tense, not shaking, not panicked, focused. His eyes stayed locked on that wall, unblinking, like he was watching something only he could see. He didn't flinch when she touched him, but he didn't look away either. "It's just a wall," the janitor added nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "That side of the building hasn't been used in years. Just old wiring, boiler stuff, I think. We sealed it off during the renovations." Echo growled low, the sound vibrating deep in his chest. Lucy stood and stepped closer to the wall. The concrete was smooth, too smooth. Newer than the rest, a different shade. Something was off. She reached out and touched it. Cold, dry, solid. But Echo stepped forward and bumped her hand with his nose, urging, almost pleading. She'd seen this behavior before, back when Echo was part of the department's elite canine unit, trained to detect bombs and cadavers. He had that same posture now, the same urgency in every part of his body. He wasn't confused. He wasn't scared. He was trying to tell her something. Down the hall, a nurse poked her head around the corner. "Is everything okay?" Lucy didn't answer. She just stared at the wall, her pulse quickening. Echo let out one more low, mournful howl, the sound cutting through the cold air like a blade. And that's when she knew something was behind that wall. And whatever it was, Echo remembered. The janitor stood with his arms crossed, fidgeting as Lucy knelt beside Echo again. The dog was still staring at the wall, tail down, shoulders tight, letting out a steady stream of low whines. Every few seconds, he pawed at the concrete, claws clicking softly like he thought he could dig straight through. Lucy placed a hand gently on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles, the steady pulse of breath through his ribs. "I told you, it's nothing," the janitor said, shifting from foot to foot. "That section's been sealed for years. We don't use it. It was just a maintenance corridor that got walled up during the last renovation. No doors, no vents, nothing." Echo growled. Not loud, not vicious, just enough to make Lucy's skin prickle. She stood up slowly, studying the wall more carefully now. It was cleaner than the rest. No scuff marks, no water stains, no dust gathered at the base where it met the floor. She squinted and ran her fingers along the edge, brushing away a thin line of white caulk. Fresh. That wall wasn't decades old. It wasn't even 5 years old. It had been put up recently. Maybe in the last few months. Lucy turned to the janitor, narrowing her eyes. You sure this has been here for years? He shrugged. I mean, that's what I was told. I don't work this wing often. Echo let out another short bark. Not random, not scared. Precise, intentional. Lucy made her decision. She walked down the hallway, pulled out her phone, and hit a contact she hadn't used in a while. Who is this? Came the groggy voice on the other end. It's Lucy, she said. I need a favor. Bring your thermal scanner. Now. An hour later, the basement was quieter again, but Echo hadn't moved. He sat like a statue in front of the wall, head tilted, ears twitching toward every sound behind the concrete. When Marcus Hale arrived, her old partner from the department, he barely looked surprised. He took one glance at Echo and muttered, Still the same stubborn mutt, huh? Lucy didn't smile. Scan the wall. Marcus pulled out his portable thermal imager and began a slow sweep across the surface. Nothing at first, just a cool, uniform blue. But then, as he reached the center, the colors shifted. A bloom of yellow and orange glowed on the screen, small at first, then spreading. He adjusted the lens and blinked hard. There's heat, he said. Right in the middle. Maybe a body. Maybe something else. But something warm is back there. Lucy felt her breath catch. Could be equipment. Marcus shook his head. Not likely. This isn't consistent with a boiler or wiring. This is something organic. Or alive. Echo barked again. Louder now. He began to dig at the floor with both paws. Tail stiff. Eyes wild. Marcus looked at her. You want to explain why this dog is acting like there's a bomb back there? Lucy didn't answer. She couldn't. She was already pulling out her phone to alert the administrator, even though she knew they'd push back, tell her to stand down, say it was out of her jurisdiction. But Echo wasn't wrong. He had never been wrong. That wall wasn't just part of an old corridor. It was a secret. And someone had gone to a lot of trouble to keep it hidden. The first swing of the sledgehammer echoed through the basement like thunder. Dust fell from the ceiling tiles, drifting through the stale air like gray snow. Lucy stood to the side, her arms crossed tight, heart pounding with every strike. Echo stayed by her feet, ears twitching at each blow, his gaze never leaving the wall. It had taken a full day of paperwork, begging, and threats, but eventually the hospital gave in. The administrators had tried to stall, called in lawyers, demanded more evidence, but the heat signature behind the wall, Echo's unrelenting behavior, and Lucy's insistence had finally pushed them past the line. Whatever was hidden back there, it wasn't just wires or pipes, and now they were going to find out. When the concrete finally cracked, the air that spilled out was wrong. Stale, sour, still. It didn't smell like any utility room. It smelled like fear, like time had stopped the moment it was sealed. The crew widened the hole, then pulled back a large panel of drywall. Flashlights beamed into the darkness, sweeping across a space that felt smaller than it looked. No windows, no vents. Just a square of silence holding secrets that had been waiting to be found. There was a steel gurney in the middle of the room, rusted at the joints, restraints still buckled at the sides. Expired 4-bags hung limp on a metal stand, labels faded, tubing curled like snakes along the floor. Along the far wall sat a small metal cart with surgical gloves, empty syringes, and a tablet, still glowing faintly in the darkness. The screen cracked but functioning. Lucy stepped forward, one slow step at a time, Echo at her side. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply stared, body rigid, breath slow and shallow. He moved like he was remembering. She picked up the tablet and tapped the screen. It flickered, then opened to a paused video. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, was strapped to the table. Her eyes were closed, her limbs limp, her chest rising and falling slowly under a hospital gown. She had bandages on her arms, electrodes on her temples. Behind her, a man in scrubs stood with a clipboard, writing something as a second figure adjusted a monitor. Lucy pressed play. The room filled with quiet audio, just a few muffled words and the steady beep of machines. One of the men leaned over the child, checked her pulse, then turned to the camera and said, "Subject 8. Vitals holding. Memory suppression stable. Begin protocol test 3." Someone behind Lucy let out a choked gasp. She turned. A nurse had come down to see what they'd found. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, eyes wide and wet. She wasn't the only one. More staff had gathered in the hall, drawn by the noise, by the whispers already spreading through the hospital like wildfire. Lucy looked back down at Echo. He had stepped toward the gurney now, nose hovering just above it. He didn't sniff like a normal dog. He stood there, still, eyes heavy. He sat down, slowly, and stared at the table with an expression that made Lucy's throat tighten. It was like he'd seen this before, like he knew. Someone had used this room. On children. In a hospital meant to heal. And Echo had remembered it all. Echo had once been a star. In the K9 unit, his name meant something. He'd tracked down missing children in snowstorms, sniffed out bombs buried under playgrounds, and once stopped a bank robbery by pinning the suspect before anyone else even knew he'd drawn a gun. Officers used to joke that Echo could smell lies, fear, guilt, all the things that people tried to hide. But all that changed the day the warehouse exploded. It had been a routine sweep, or so they thought. Echo and Lucy were the first to enter. He'd barked twice, sharp and urgent, right before the blast tore through the wall and sent both of them flying. Lucy escaped with a concussion and a broken wrist. Echo wasn't as lucky. Shrapnel had torn into his hind leg, left deep scarring across his flank, and damaged the hearing in his left ear. After weeks in recovery, he limped, flinched at loud noises, and sometimes growled at shadows. The department called it trauma. They said he was too reactive now, too risky. They offered early retirement and reassignment, a lighter post at St. Arlo's Medical Center as a therapy and patrol dog, just to keep him occupied. Most handlers would have let it go. Lucy didn't. She took the job at St. Arlo's not because she needed it, but because she refused to be separated from Echo. They weren't just partners, they were survivors. She'd seen the fire in his eyes, the drive, the refusal to give up even when his leg buckled or his ribs ached. And lately, she'd seen something else: restlessness. He'd pace the hospital floors at night, always drifting back to the basement. He would pause near the elevators, ears twitching, body still, then pull toward the stairs like he was chasing a sound only he could hear. Lucy tried to redirect him, call him off, distract him with his favorite toy, but he always circled back, always returned to that same cold stretch of concrete 2 floors below the pediatric wing. At first, she thought it was habit. Echo had always been drawn to patterns. He mapped places in his head, noted the changes in smell and sound, the rhythm of the building. But this was different. He wasn't just checking. He was hunting. Then came the nights when he stood facing the wall, silent, rigid, unmoving, as if waiting for something. Lucy had tried to brush it off, even told herself it was part of his recovery. Dogs acted out sometimes. Echo had seen things most people never would. Maybe it was a ghost memory, a trigger. But deep down, she knew better. Now, standing in the basement, with dust still settling, and the image of that child strapped to a table burned into her memory, Lucy felt something cold grip her chest. Echo hadn't been wandering. He hadn't been restless. He had remembered. The wall wasn't just concrete to him. It was a wound, a place where something terrible had happened, something he'd smelled, heard, felt, maybe even during one of his old hospital visits before the reassignment. And like every time before, Echo didn't forget. Even when everyone else looked away, even when the system pushed him aside and called him done, he remembered. He kept watching. He kept trying. Because Echo wasn't finished. He never had been. The ID badge lay on the ground, where one of the officers had dropped it after pulling it from beneath the gurney. The plastic was smudged with dust, the photo slightly faded, but the name was clear. Dr. Elias Wren, the hospital's former chief of pediatrics. The man everyone believed had died in a fiery car crash 6 months ago. His funeral had been quiet, private, with no open casket and very few answers. The staff at St. Arlo's had mourned him briefly, then moved on. But now, staring at the badge resting on the cold floor of a hidden room, Lucy felt her stomach twist. Echo stared at it too, but not in silence. The moment she picked it up, he barked. A deep, sharp warning that echoed off the concrete walls. His fur bristled, his stance rigid. He growled low in his throat, the kind of sound that came from a place of memory and rage. Lucy backed up slowly, badge still in her hand. Echo's eyes didn't leave the photo. It wasn't just a reaction. It was recognition. She crouched down, spoke softly, tried to calm him, but Echo wouldn't break his stare. It was as if the photo itself was the enemy, as if this one image brought back something he hadn't wanted to remember. The others in the room watched nervously, but Lucy wasn't afraid of Echo. She was afraid of what he knew, what he had seen and never forgotten. Later that night, when the basement had been sealed off and the media had started sniffing around, Lucy returned to her small office on the second floor. Echo curled on the rug beside her desk, but he didn't sleep. His ears twitched every time the building creaked. His eyes stayed open, watching, waiting. Lucy powered up her laptop and started digging through old hospital files. Dr. Wren's name was still on several reports, even after his supposed death. A few routine checkups, prescriptions, test orders, things that should have been closed or transferred, but they weren't. Some had been signed electronically just weeks ago. She pulled up the digital signature log. All the recent ones were flagged with strange timestamps. Middle of the night, when the system usually shut down for updates. She went deeper, pulling patient records from the months before Wren's accident. There were missing files. Children admitted for routine procedures who had no discharge summaries. One had been scheduled for a tonsillectomy and never appeared in the follow-up queue. Another was listed as released to family, but had no guardian signature or nurse verification. Lucy frowned and looked at Echo, who had finally lifted his head to watch her. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "He never left." She ran a cross-check with the hospital's security footage, but most of it had been deleted or overwritten, except for one clip, buried in a backup folder, marked as corrupted. She played it anyway. It showed a blurry hallway camera, timestamped 2 weeks after Wren's death. A tall man in scrubs, his face turned from the camera, walking with a limp and carrying a small cooler. Echo lifted his head sharply and growled at the screen. Lucy leaned in closer, heart pounding. It wasn't a ghost. Dr. Elias Wren was alive, and he was still here. The tablet had been handed off to the FBI, but not before Lucy made a quiet copy of the files onto her own drive. She told herself it was in case something got lost in the process, but deep down, it was more than that. She needed to see it again, needed to understand what Echo had been trying to show her. Back in her apartment that night, with the lights dim and the world feeling too heavy to carry, she opened the folder marked Video 12. The clip was only 30 seconds long, grainy and poorly lit, filmed from the same corner of the hidden room they had broken into. A small girl sat on the edge of the steel gurney, legs swinging slightly, head drooped forward. Electrodes were attached to her temple, and a machine beeped slowly beside her. But it wasn't her face that caught Lucy's breath in her throat. It was her socks. One was bright blue with stars, the other plain blue with a hole in the heel. Lucy paused the video, heart racing. She knew those socks. She pulled open a drawer and fished out a missing persons file she had held on to longer than she was supposed to. A worn, dog-eared page with a photo clipped to the corner. A girl, age 8, smiling shyly at the camera, with a gap in her teeth and long dark curls pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her name was Amelia Grant. She had been admitted to St. Arlo's with an aggressive illness. No one could explain it. No one could cure it. And then, she was gone. The hospital said she had passed peacefully. The records confirmed it. A death certificate, signed by Dr. Elias Wren himself. Cremation arranged by the hospital. No autopsy. No visitation. Her parents had questions, but no power to fight back. Lucy had met them once, outside the pediatric wing, hollow-eyed and quiet. She remembered Amelia's mother asking, "Are you sure that was my daughter? They never let us see her face." Echo padded over to her and nudged the photo with his nose. Lucy held it out, and he sniffed again, then turned without a sound and walked to the front door. He looked back at her, waiting. "You think she's still here?" Lucy whispered. Echo's tail gave one small wag. Then he turned again and headed toward the basement stairs. They walked together in silence, the halls still and empty. When they reached the sealed wall, Echo sat, staring once more, not barking, not whining, just watching. Like he knew the girl had been here, maybe still was. Lucy crouched beside him, brushing her fingers over the cold floor. "She was supposed to be dead," she said, barely above a whisper. "But they never let anyone see her. Not really." Echo laid his head down but didn't close his eyes. His body was alert, waiting, remembering. Something wasn't finished. Amelia Grant hadn't just vanished. And Echo never followed ghosts. He followed the truth. After the tablet footage made its way to federal hands, everything changed. The FBI came in like a storm, badges flashing, radios buzzing, boots echoing down halls that hadn't seen real law in years. They sealed the basement, blocked it off with caution tape and armed guards. Staff whispered in corners, afraid to speak too loudly, afraid to be heard. Lucy was told to stay out of it. She was a hospital employee now, not law enforcement. She had done her part, but Echo hadn't. He didn't understand closed cases or jurisdiction. He understood what he smelled, what he heard, what he remembered. And he remembered more than anyone knew. 2 nights after the basement was locked down, Echo stood at the stairwell again, nose pressed to the air. Lucy, off shift and running on coffee and instinct, didn't argue. She just clipped the leash to his collar and followed him. He didn't go back to the basement. He took her somewhere else. The 3rd floor had long been under renovation. That's what the sign said. But the dust was old, the tools untouched. Echo led her past tarps and scaffolding to a locked door at the end of a dark hallway. Lucy jimmied it open with her old badge key, half surprised it still worked. The room beyond smelled like old bleach and metal. Echo padded forward, tail stiff, nose low to the ground. In the far corner, beneath a pile of unused cabinets, he began to dig. Lucy helped, moving the panels aside. Behind them was a rusted medical cart. On top sat a thick file folder and an envelope marked anonymized subject list. Inside were names, dozens of them, children, all marked with strange codes, treatment notes, and the same signature repeated over and over again. Dr. Elias Wren. They took the evidence to the agent in charge, a woman named Torres, with sharp eyes and a tighter mouth. She barely said thank you. She told Lucy to let the professionals handle it from here. But the next night, Echo was pacing again. This time he led her to the oldest wing of the hospital, a section used before the new trauma center was built. Echo nosed at a broom closet door. Inside, Lucy found a false panel in the back. Behind it was a computer server, still running, fans humming low. It was connected to nothing else in the hospital system. No shared drive. No open network. She plugged in her own tablet and copied what she could. When she read it later, her heart dropped. There were financial logs, payments from private donors, shell companies, mentions of experimental programs, a list of names that weren't just doctors but politicians, investors, state officials. Echo hadn't been sniffing for bodies or drugs. He had been following something deeper, a pattern of movement, of silence, of doors that only opened at night. He remembered every hallway he was ever dragged down, every strange odor, every tremble in the ground when machines hummed behind false walls. They had thought they found the secret in the basement, but Echo knew better. The real horror ran underneath everything, and it had been there a long time. The locker door creaked as Lucy opened it, the familiar clang of metal echoing in the quiet staff room. She hadn't expected anything unusual, just the same set of scrubs, her half-empty water bottle, and Echo's favorite chew toy tucked in the corner. But today, something was different. A small box sat right in the middle of the top shelf, plain, wooden, and unmarked. Her heart thudded once, slow and heavy. She hadn't put it there. Hands steady, she lifted the box and opened it. Inside was a silver dog whistle, the kind trainers used but rarely anymore. Beneath it, folded with care, was a single sheet of lined paper. No name, no date, just a short, neat message, written in black ink. He remembers everything. He saw what they did to me. Lucy stared at the words, the breath catching in her throat. She read them again, then looked down at Echo. He had followed her in, and now he sat beside her locker, still and alert. His eyes were locked on the box, like he knew what was inside, like he was waiting. She held out the whistle, and his ears twitched. He didn't react with fear or confusion. He reacted with something deeper, recognition. There was a scent on the box too, faint but familiar. Lucy leaned closer, trying to place it, when it hit her all at once. Vanilla and something sharper, like antiseptic and lavender. A smell that had clung to Echo's fur the first few weeks after the explosion, when he would pace at night and whine in his sleep. Grace. The name came back like a punch to the chest. Grace had been a quiet girl, maybe 9 or 10, brought in under a fake name last year. No parents listed, no visitors allowed. Lucy had only seen her twice, once in the hallway clinging to a nurse's hand, the second time sitting alone in the playroom, staring at a wall while Echo laid at her feet. He had found her instantly, pulled from Lucy's grip, and pressed his body close to the girl like he was protecting her. Grace hadn't spoken, but she had smiled, just once, when Echo rested his head in her lap. And then, she was gone. Lucy had asked around, but no one knew. Or maybe no one wanted to say. The file disappeared. The nurses shrugged. One doctor said Grace had been transferred to a care facility upstate. But something about the way he avoided eye contact never sat right. Now, with the whistle cold in her palm, and Echo still staring at the box, Lucy knew the truth. Grace hadn't been transferred. She had been erased. Echo had known. He'd carried her scent like a burden, circling the hospital halls looking for something no one else remembered. But he had remembered her. Every time he passed the playroom, every time they walked near the old pediatrics wing, every time he sat and whined at the door of a room no longer on the hospital map. Lucy looked down at the letter again, at the words that felt like a whisper from the dark. He remembers everything. He saw what they did to me. Grace was real, and Echo had never stopped looking for her. The fire alarms went off just after midnight, long wails echoing through the lower levels of the hospital. Lucy had just finished checking on Echo and was heading down to the staff lounge when she saw smoke curling from the stairwell, the basement. Her stomach dropped. Echo was already moving, nose to the ground, body tense. He bolted before she could stop him, disappearing down the stairs through the thickening haze. By the time she reached the bottom, the emergency lights were blinking red and white, casting everything in a flickering, haunted glow. Smoke filled the air, choking and bitter. Staff were shouting, sprinklers hissing from the ceiling. But it wasn't water that hit Lucy's face. It was heat. Then she heard barking. Sharp, desperate. Echo. She pushed through the smoke and spotted him halfway down the corridor, dragging something heavy by the scruff of a coat. A nurse, unconscious. Echo gripped her collar in his jaws, pulling with every ounce of strength in his battered frame. Flames licked at the far end of the hallway. One of the ceiling tiles crashed down behind them with a loud snap. Lucy ran to them and helped haul the woman out. They stumbled into the stairwell together, coughing and gasping. The nurse still out cold. Echo limped beside them, his front paw leaving red prints on the tile. He was hurt. Outside, firefighters swarmed the building. Investigators showed up within the hour, nodding seriously and muttering things about faulty wiring and flammable storage materials. No one questioned why Echo had been down there. No one mentioned how the sprinklers hadn't triggered on that side. No one cared that the security cameras had conveniently glitched. But Lucy knew. She saw the truth in the nurse's cracked ID badge. She worked in administration. And she had spoken to Lucy 2 days earlier, said she had found something strange in a records drawer and wanted to meet privately. But she'd never followed up. Until now. Lucy watched them wheel her into the ambulance, then knelt beside Echo. His paw was bleeding. His breathing was shallow. But his eyes were locked on the entrance like he wasn't finished yet. They wanted him silenced. They had tried to burn it away. She wrapped his paw in a strip torn from her shirt, carried him back inside, and locked herself in the hospital's tech room. It wasn't hard to find the secure server, not when you knew where to look. She bypassed passwords with codes she wasn't supposed to know, traced file paths that flickered like spiderwebs across the screen. Most were empty, erased, but deep in a hidden folder marked Archive X, she found a feed still active. The footage loaded slowly, frame by frame. The camera was set high in an operating room, dimly lit. A man in a white coat stood over a child, strapped to a table. He moved like a surgeon, like someone confident and calm. He turned toward the camera briefly, adjusting his gloves. Lucy's heart stopped. It was Dr. Elias Wren, alive, whole, working. The timestamp was from 7 days ago. Echo, still lying on the floor beside her, let out a low growl. They had set a trap, but they'd forgotten who they were dealing with. The compound sat at the edge of a forgotten road, hidden by thick trees and a crumbling fence with a broken padlock. From the outside, it looked like a storage site. Rows of rusted units, a small office, a chain-link gate barely standing, but Echo had led them there with purpose. Every time he stopped at a certain hallway in the hospital, every time he growled at the elevator, every time he refused to move past a certain corridor, he was pointing them here, not with words, but with something stronger: memory. The FBI moved in before dawn. Unmarked vans rolled through the mist. Agents dressed in black spilled out, weapons drawn, radios whispering commands. Lucy stayed back with Echo, tucked behind one of the trees, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't blink. Echo sat beside her, tense but still, his eyes fixed on the compound like he already knew what they'd find inside. It didn't take long. The first unit was empty, just dust and old crates. But the third, Agent Torres called out from inside, her voice sharp and stunned. "We've got them!" Inside were rows of narrow cots, dim lights, and machines humming quietly. Children, dozens of them, drugged, dehydrated, but breathing. Some were tied down, others barely stirred when touched. The air was heavy with chemicals and sickness and silence. Echo let out a low, broken whine, the sound of a heart remembering what it had smelled before. The agents worked fast. Medics rushed in, IVs, stretchers, soft voices trying to comfort tiny bodies that couldn't respond. Lucy walked in behind them, holding her breath, her throat burning. And there they were: Amelia, Grace, others she didn't know. All of them real, all of them alive. One of the boys opened his eyes as they passed. His lips cracked, whispering something too soft to hear. Lucy knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. He blinked slowly, then pointed with a weak hand toward Echo. "The dog," he said. He came back. Lucy's chest caved in. She reached for Echo, and he moved to her side, placing his head on her knee, like he understood every word. They sat there together as one child after another was carried out into the waiting arms of safety. The morning sun crept through the trees. The light touched the ground like it hadn't in years. By the time the last child was loaded into the ambulance, Lucy's hands were trembling. Echo, exhausted and limping from the fire's injuries, still hadn't looked away. She knelt beside him, fingers curling around his paw, warm and solid. "You were right," she whispered. "You were always right." Echo didn't bark. He just leaned into her, eyes soft, as if the weight he had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. Behind them, the compound buzzed with movement. Files were gathered, computers seized, names were spoken aloud, names of people in power, people who had built the walls and locked the doors. But Echo had found the cracks, and when the lights came on, the truth couldn't hide anymore. The courtroom was packed wall to wall, but you could still hear a pin drop when the first child stepped onto the witness stand. He was small, maybe 9, his hair too short, and his clothes a little too big, like they'd been donated last minute. But his voice, though soft, carried across the room, with a strength that made the walls feel smaller. He spoke of white rooms and cold beds, of lights that never turned off, and doctors who didn't smile. He named names, names that made jaws tighten and pens freeze mid-note. A state senator, a hospital board member, a local philanthropist whose face was still on banners outside St. Arlo's. One by one, the children came forward. Amelia, Grace, others Lucy had only known through photos and whispered reports. They were tired, still healing, but they spoke anyway. Some cried, some trembled, all remembered. And sitting quietly in the front row, wearing a dark blue canine vest over his scarred back, was Echo. He didn't move when the cameras turned toward him. He didn't bark or growl or make a sound. He simply sat, ears twitching occasionally, eyes fixed on the stand. Every time a child paused or faltered, his presence was there like a blanket, steady, grounding. Some of the children looked directly at him as they spoke, drawing courage from the dog who had never stopped searching for them. Lucy sat beside him, one hand resting gently on his side. The courtroom's polished floors gleamed under the harsh lights, but all she could see was the path that had led them here, the wall in the basement, the hidden room, the false death of Dr. Wren, and Echo, always Echo, guiding her when no one else would listen. Reporters called him the memory dog. They wrote about his sharp instincts, his unmatched nose, his loyalty. They called him a miracle, a hero, a symbol of justice. Photos of him in the courtroom spread like wildfire. Artists painted murals, children wrote letters. Someone even started a petition to give him a national medal. But Lucy didn't need headlines. She didn't need medals. She watched Echo now, his body calm but alert, the weight of the past still heavy on his shoulders. To her, he wasn't just a headline or a story. He was family. He had carried their grief, remembered their names, followed scents most dogs would have forgotten long ago. He had pulled children from darkness, not with teeth or force, but with quiet determination, with endless steps down endless hallways, with the unshakable belief that someone had to remember when the world chose to forget. Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with people holding candles and signs. Survivors, families, strangers who had read the reports and couldn't sleep since. Inside, Echo lay down at Lucy's feet and closed his eyes, not out of fatigue, but peace. The truth was finally spoken, and the dog who made it possible was right there, listening. The ceremony was held on a warm spring afternoon in Washington, beneath a sky so blue it didn't seem real. There were flags, cameras, and people in sharp suits who spoke into microphones about courage and sacrifice. A silver medal glinted in the sun as it was clipped gently onto a navy blue ribbon, then fastened around Echo's thick neck just above his vest. The crowd stood and applauded, many with tears in their eyes. But Echo didn't react. He just sat quietly beside Lucy, tail brushing against her boot, eyes steady and calm. To the rest of the country, this was a moment to celebrate a hero. They called it justice. They called it closure. But Lucy knew better. Echo didn't do this for awards. He didn't need fanfare. He hadn't chased headlines. He had chased ghosts. real ones, children who had vanished, names that had been buried, and truths hidden behind walls and silence. Later, they returned home in Lucy's truck. The window rolled halfway down so Echo could smell the wind. The metal clinked softly against his collar, but he didn't seem to notice. When they pulled into the gravel driveway, Echo jumped down slowly, careful with his still healing leg. The house was simple. One story with peeling paint and a big backyard lined with trees. Birds chirped from the fence line, and a breeze danced through the grass. Echo walked straight to the porch, waited for Lucy to unlock the door, and stepped inside like he'd lived there forever. There were no locked rooms in Lucy's house, no closed doors, nothing hidden. Echo wandered from room to room, checking corners, sniffing rugs, cataloging scents. It was something he did now and then, out of habit more than need. Lucy let him. She understood. Sometimes, at night, he would walk to the basement stairs and stand there for a long time, silent, not growling, not howling, just watching, remembering. She would find him like that, his body still, eyes fixed on the dark below. And then he would turn around and lie down at her feet, resting his head on the floor, like he had made sure everything was still okay. Lucy placed the medal in a shadow box on the shelf, beside a photo of Echo sitting outside the courthouse steps, and another of him beside Amelia and Grace, their arms wrapped around his neck, their faces full of something that had taken a long time to come back: joy. The newspapers moved on, eventually. The cameras stopped flashing. But the letters still came. From parents, from kids, from people who had been afraid to speak until Echo gave them the courage to. Lucy read them aloud sometimes as they sat on the porch together, her hand resting gently on his back. "You did good," she would whisper. "You brought the truth into the light." And Echo, scarred but strong, would wag his tail once, slow and steady, before closing his eyes. Because some dogs don't forget. Some carry memories like scars, but the best ones, the rare ones, they carry them like torches, and they don't stop until the fire lights the way home. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you like this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.